This is another fellow who put in there, he wants to insist on the ether. And he says, light is just a vibration in the ether medium. The medium is dipolar, electrons and positron pairs, particles that repel each other. Matter is a crystalline structure of photons. Ether medium particles squeeze into a crystalline structure. Quantum ether is a mathematical with predictive power, cannot have material existence. No kidding. So if the ether is not material, I don't know what kind of physics we're doing here. Gravity is the movement of these medium particles towards the low pressure area created by constriction in the medium flowing around and created by matter. Well, I don't know what all that means. I'm just going to address the ether because that's what we're concerned. He says it's the vibration of the ether medium. Here's what this guy is proposing. He's saying, look, that's light. Light is the vibration of the ether medium. So he sees some kind of vibration, that wiggly worm that you see there. And what is that wiggly worm? Well, it's just the vibration of all those particles. That's what it is. They're moving up and down. They're causing this wiggling. And he says that's what light is. That's what a lot of people out there think light is. The vibration of the ether. Okay? So that's the starting point. But we have to go one step back because these people are already moving ahead into theory, and we're not interested in the theory. We want to get to the bottom of the ether. We want to know what this ether stuff is. So that's where we have to start. We haven't finished with the ether, and you can't even start your theory until we cover every base on the ether. Okay, so let's go with the ether here. This is the ether this person is proposing. He's saying it's made of positrons and electrons, etc. What are positrons? What are electrons? What is the black stuff that contours each one of these little balls? Assuming these are little balls, that's what I'm assuming. I'm assuming that when the person says electron, he's thinking about a tiny little bead. Or we're going to think of it as a round one because that's convenient, only because of that. So what contours that ball? What contours the red and white balls there? You know, you can have an infinite ether. Here's the same thing, but infinite, and irrespective. We need to know what that black stuff is. We want to know what is that black stuff that gives shape to each one of those particles. Let's zoom in with our microscope and find out what this looks like. And here you see what it looks like. Okay, we have the electron particle and the positron particle. Okay, one is red, the other one is white. One carries a negative sign above its head, and the other one a positive sign. Now, how do these two things attract each other? I mean, physically. Does the plus sign get somehow tangled with the negative sign? Is that how the attraction occurs between these two particles? In other words, we got several issues here. We have, first, the issue of what's the black stuff? I need to know what's contouring each one of those two particles. The second issue is, okay, even if we concede that, how does one particle attract the other? Are we just going to use the magic wand and say, well, they do, and positive attracts negative? Well, what does positive mean in physical terms? What does negative mean in physical terms? Unless you can put this in physical terms, that plus and minus are absolutely nothing. They're just descriptions. You're saying, well, whenever we have a particle attract another, we'll call this one the positive one and that one the negative one. And by definition, the positive one is the positron and the other one is the electron. We're done. That's only a description. That's labeling. You still haven't told me the mechanism. And so what I do is just put out a set of questions that anyone who proposes the famous ether has to answer. Okay, these are the questions, okay? Does the ether fill space, or is the ether equal to space? In other words, are space and ether synonyms, the same, equal, etc.? What encapsulates each particle that constitutes the ether? In other words, what's that black stuff? If space contours each particle of ether, what is space? Define or draw space. I need for you to give me a definition of the word space, or if you think it's an object, I want you to draw it. And in which case, is space infinite or finite? Well, if it's finite, meaning it's an object, you got to tell me what encapsulates space. And if it's infinite, well, what do you mean by infinite? What do you mean that space is infinite? What does that mean? Is space a physical object that is infinite? And then the last one, is the ether within an infinite space, infinite or finite? Because space, you can say maybe you manage to defend the fact that it's infinite, okay? And then the question is the ether within that space finite or infinite? I mean, do we have this situation? See, there's space, we're going to assume it's infinite. And the ether, which is that the red and white balls, the body there, is that finite? It stops somewhere and then space continues to infinity, whatever infinity is. And if space is not infinite, well, what contours space? What encapsulates space? So those are the questions that the proponent of ether has to answer before they rant about their theories. We don't want to hear your theories. Okay, we don't want to hear your theories because they're bunk unless you can get through the qualitative assumptions that you need to start your theory. You need to finish with the ether. You haven't finished with your theory. Spend 2 years on the ether, 1 second on your theory, okay? It's the other way around. You want to talk about your theory, how the ether vibrates, and yeah, and we proved it in the lab. We don't want to hear any of that. We want to know what the ether is before you start. We're going to bombard you with questions on what the ether is, what contours each particle, is space infinite. Those are the questions we want answered.